Let's take our Bibles to John chapter 4. I hesitated preaching this at this time, but I believe God orchestrated us to go through the lessons and teachings of Jesus Christ in the direction, and actually kind of got confirmation again from Jesus Christ tonight when the song list, the schedules there were put out a long time ago. Trying to get them done a month ahead of time so everybody has the time they need to practice and all of that. But to hear that song, I have decided to follow Jesus. It goes right along with the message tonight, and I think it'll be a blessing to you. Also, last night, I'm going to tell you, as pastor, whenever I get a message and a lesson ready, I always ask the Lord to speak to me. And last night on the way home, I called a friend of mine that called me Tuesday night. And we were talking on the phone, and I said, I just want you to know that the Lord laid this lesson on my heart. And in the middle of it, I was thinking about you and our conversation. I referred to him in the message, but the lesson was on loving your enemies. Loving your enemies, and it's not the natural desire for us to do that. Our natural man says, well, they've hurt me, they've harmed me. But Jesus Christ says we're supposed to love them. And really that leads into the message tonight. Here in John chapter 4, just a couple verses that we're going to look at here, verse number 43 through 45. We'll get into some introduction stuff and then get into the message pretty quickly tonight. But John chapter 4, verse number 43 through 45 says this, Now after 2 days he departed thence and went into Galilee, for Jesus himself testified that a prophet hath no honor in his own country. Then when he came into Galilee, the Galileans received him, having seen all the things that he did at Jerusalem at the feast, for they also went unto the feast. I had fun sitting there and reminiscing a little bit this today and a couple weeks ago when I was putting the outline together and the introduction. I look about at this text, and the title of the lesson tonight is called The Honeymoon. The Honeymoon. And it's not talking about marriage. It's not talking about, but as an introduction, I thought back to when Miss Bethany and I got married, June 1st, 2010. Believe it or not, I didn't have to look that up on my marriage certificate yet. I'm sure at some point we'll have to. But we took the school, the church had a couple different things throughout the years where they actually had a company that would donate the use of a limousine. And so through the course of that, one of the times was for youth conference. Occasionally they did that. And one time I was sitting there with our youth pastor, and he said, we forgot tomorrow. We have the limousine coming. We need someone to ride with them down to the hot dog place, take the kids, eat to the winners of the contest to eat. And I'm like, well, if you need someone, I'll volunteer. I can make myself free to ride in a limousine with them. And that time it was a Hummer. The next year it was a Corvette limousine, which was, it wasn't comfortable at all, but it was pretty neat. All right, it was pretty fun to drive down the road and watch. There was a group of guys that were working on the side of the road, and the ones, holding up the shovel like they all do. And he just, when he saw the Corvette coming by, and the police officer right on the one main road there was actually back when they had the radar guns out, and he had his radar gun out, and all of a sudden you see his radar gun come down, and he's just watching the limousine. But anyway, that allowed me to make some connections, and so through that, for the wedding there, I didn't really care to drive to Chicago. After getting married, I didn't want my wife to see my driving style right away after we got married. So we took a limousine up to Chicago, and I had planned, I kind of looked it up. There's a famous hotel called the Drake in Chicago, but that was above my price range. But there is a place, they call it the sister hotel of that, called the Blake. And I thought, well, it's got to be a nice place, and so I went ahead and got that, and it didn't take me too long to notice that was basically the business part of the hotel. There wasn't anything to do as far as the hotel. It was you come in, check in, there's your room, that's it. But it was a nice place. We enjoyed the time there, and then spent one more day in Chicago. And then I had a friend of mine that I think he was trying to be a blessing. I know he was, but he gave me one of those vouchers for I don't remember exactly the days, 7 days, 6 days, 7 night vacation thing, whatever. It was one of those timeshare presentations. I had never done one of those, and I thought it can't be that bad. Exactly. But it was only $99. So I was like, you know what? For my honeymoon, that's what we're doing. So we flew down to Florida, down to Fort Lauderdale, and spent couple days there, and then took a cruise down to the Grand Caribbean island, and then a cruise back. It was like a family type cruise, so it was really nice. They had the half of the boat was family, and you had to be dressed properly on that side of the boat, and all that. And then we didn't even go to the other end where, all the nonsense happened. So, but they had a Brazilian steakhouse on there, all you could eat meat. Right on. All right. But anyway, we enjoyed that time together, and then we came back and spent a couple days in Orlando. You say, why are you going through all that? Because during that time, for the first time, I was able to hold my wife's hand. I was able, all that smoochy Gucci stuff, kissing and all that stuff that we had never done before. But we're 2010, now it's 2026. We're not still in Florida and the Caribbean on our honeymoon. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? To still be 16 years later on your honeymoon. But obviously, the point is, you go through that and you enjoy that time together because it's new, it's special, but then you come back, and as they say, the honeymoon ends. And then the real work starts. If you're going to have a good marriage, we understand that it takes real work. You say, well, why do you go through all that? Because what I saw in this verse as I read through it, it says there the Galileans received him. Why does it say the Galileans received him? Because they saw what he had done in Jerusalem. They saw the miracles. They saw the exciting, special things that Jesus Christ had done. By this point in his ministry, he had pretty much been accepted by everybody he came across. John the Baptist, we saw him and his disciples. Some of his disciples followed him. The crowds at the first Passover and just afterward. Then we saw the first miracle when he changed the water into wine. Of course, people saw that. Oh, we want to follow Jesus. Then he goes to Samaria. And we talked about the woman at the well, and she gets saved, and she went and brought everybody out to see him. But just like everything, the honeymoon period ends. And we still see by this time, the passage we're looking at, Jesus Christ has only preached 2 sermons. That the people, and by the time he had preached these 2 sermons, the people in his hometown wanted to kill him. To the point that they did try to kill him. And we'll see in the course of this year that initial acceptance that Jesus Christ, oh, he's doing all these miracles, what a great thing. We're going to see through the entire rest of his life that many people, his life, his ministry is swamped by rejection, isn't it? It's swamped by ridicule and opposition and hate. And so my question to us, and the reason I called it the honeymoon, is to ask this question: how do we keep the honeymoon period from ending? How do we make sure, because eventually you're going to hear a phrase used in the idea of disciples following Jesus Christ, that it says, they went and followed him no more. So how do we get from being a group like the Galileans here that, oh yeah, we're going to accept him, we want to follow him, to then following him no more? And I don't mean this on a national way. Okay, I think all of us look at the news, and it doesn't take you very long to realize we're long past that in our nation. The honeymoon period of this being a country in God we trust, one nation under God, that's long gone, isn't it? But that doesn't mean it has to be gone with us. And I want to ask us tonight, I want to preach this message in such a way that tonight, if we love Him, and I believe you're here because you love Jesus Christ. I don't think you'd be faithful to Him in such a way if you didn't at least have a desire to love Him. So how do we go from and make sure that we never stop loving Him? Now, when I was putting these lessons together, this message was actually supposed to be like 2 weeks prior to this, but we ended up having services canceled, and then we had missionary come in, which wasn't on the schedule. And as I'm looking at it, I'm like, hey, that fits perfect because Saturday's Valentine's Day, right? But how do we keep ourselves from getting to a point that we don't love Jesus anymore? I want to give you a couple of thoughts tonight to help us with this. The first one that I want to give you is this idea that, number one, we have to make sure as Christians that we are not following Christ just for the miracles. That's easy, isn't it? In the good times to say, oh yeah, I'm a follower. The purpose, as we've seen through the messages, the purposes that Jesus did miracles for these people was for what? To authenticate Himself as Jesus and to establish His authority. Okay, those are the two things that we've seen happen. And so, and He was doing that publicly. So along the way, Jesus Christ helped people. Why? Because He was authenticating the fact that He was the Messiah. Along the way, these miracles produced excitement. I mean, think about it. You're at the wedding, you run out of grape juice, and He makes more, and it tastes better, and all He did was put water in the pot. Well, that would cause some excitement. And what I'm trying to get at is, if we're not careful, we allow being a Christian, we allow church, we allow our relationship with Jesus Christ to become, I'm doing it because of what I get in return. And if you're not careful, that leads to exactly what we talk about, the prosperity gospel, isn't it? I'm all for personalizing a relationship with God. But when I personalize my relationship to the point that God exists for me, that's not right, is it? Why did God create us? For Him. But that's how we get as a Christian sometimes if we're not careful. Right? I remember as a young person when my dad sat us down and he said, young kids, we're going to learn prayer. And I think my junior high youth pastor did this as well. We're going to try to pray this whole time without saying, I need, please give. Because what is that? We get into this whole list of everything that we need, and our relationship becomes God's just an ATM machine that we don't have to actually put money into. We just go to Him and ask Him, and He gives it out. Kind of like a daughter to their dad. Why are you laughing? I'm just kidding. All right. But if we're not careful, there's this idea of, in our world, in our country, well, I'm going to go to this church because it's going to give me what I need, but then as soon as they touch the sensitive things, my sin, I'm going to leave and go to another church. I'm going to go, all right, and I've heard that from multiple people, pastor friends of mine that we grew up together, or even pastor friends in this area. They said, you know what, somebody told me this sometime when we started the church. You're going to realize Pennsylvania people, most of them are church hoppers. They'll come for that honeymoon period. But then when it gets down to the brass tacks of Christianity, that's not what they want. They don't want to lock in and have that personal relationship with God. And I'll be the first one to tell you, God does some amazing things. Yeah. The history of this church, I have it all documented on my computer. Why? Because I don't want to ever lose sight of what God has done. The stories of maybe health things that my family has gone through. Somebody was just asking this week about different situations we've gone through. It's exciting to talk about the good things that God has done. But if those amazing things become what we follow Him for, eventually we're going to cease to follow Him. Because there's going to be a time that we're going through life and we say, I really need something amazing to happen, but where's God? And we're going to get ourselves to think, well, God's no longer working. But remember, the Bible talks about God having a still small voice. Sometimes He doesn't work in that dynamite power. And that bold, just that voice that everybody in the world hears. Sometimes He wants you just to hear His still small voice that says, take another step. Take another step. You think about it, God, every situation in your life doesn't turn out to be a miracle. Just a news flash. God's children do get sick. I think about my mother. I think about Mr. Craig O'Hare and people like that. God's people do die. Well, God's not working. No, we got to be careful. All right? Guess what? God's people do go broke sometimes, don't they? God's people do have children that rebel sometimes. God's people, they do get fired sometimes from their job. You think about the 3 Hebrew children. They literally got fired, didn't they? All right? They were doing what was right. And I know we know the end of the story. But they didn't know the end of the story, did they? When they were bound and taken to the fiery furnace, they didn't know that they were going to come walking out and their clothes were not even going to smell like smoke. They didn't know that while they were going to be in the fire, that Nebuchadnezzar was going to see a 4th man walking as if it was the Son of God. They didn't know that, did they? They literally believed, I believe they knew, we're getting thrown into the fiery furnace, and next breath we're going to open up our eyes and see Jesus Christ. Now, okay, I've thought about this often. When they died, anybody in the Old Testament was not immediately going to be in heaven. Do we understand that? Why? Because the price for sin had not yet been paid. That's why you hear when Lazarus died in the New Testament, he was carried into Abraham's bosom, and it's as if he wasn't yet in heaven, because the price of sin had not yet been paid. And so if the price for their sin had not yet been paid, there can be no sin in God's presence. Okay. Now today, the Bible says to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. How can that be? Because the price of sin is paid. All right. But I think about those 3 Hebrew children when they were thrown into the fiery furnace. Listen to the words they said. Daniel 3, verse 17 and 18. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. What were the three Hebrew children saying? We're following God, no matter whether he makes a miracle in our life or not. And I think about these Galileans that were following Jesus Christ. They were following him for the excitement. They were following him for the miracles. Christian, it's fun in those times. But it's fun to come to special events, revival services, and friend day and all this when you see God do amazing things. But revival service doesn't last all year. I'd love it to. But we have to go back to normal life, don't we? We have to apply what we learn. And sometimes the monotony of it does get old. Sometimes living the Christian life, you can get dried up times in your Christian life. And if you're just following God for then you're going to end up having some difficult times as a Christian, to the point that you may end up stop following him. Number two, the second thing we need to remember is to continue to make time with him. Not just for him. I think that's where a lot of us get to if we're not careful. Oh, I got to make time for Jesus. No, you need to make time with Jesus. 1 Corinthians 3:9 says, for we are laborers together with God. Ye are God's husbandry, ye are God's building. One of the greatest weapons that the devil has in his arsenal for us, listen, I believe one of the greatest weapons he uses is to keep us so busy serving God. That you say, how is that bad? That we stop spending time with him. Have you ever been there where you're so busy? Man, I got so much to get done. I've been there, even with church things. And all of a sudden you realize, I stopped spending time with Jesus. Remember Mary and Martha? Jesus was coming over, and of course Martha wanted to make sure the house was clean and the food was ready, and it was hot right when Jesus wanted to eat. She wanted to take care of him, and she comes out and she says, Mary, get busy, we got a lot to do. And Jesus said, no. Martha, you're so cumbered about with all these serving things that you forgot what you needed the most. This one thing. And what was that? Just to sit at Jesus' feet. I don't need to spend so much time serving Jesus Christ that I can't just go crawl up on my Father's lap and spend time fellowshipping with him. If I get that busy, I'm too busy. Right? And I have a lot of stats here on pastors, and I'm obviously not preaching to pastors. This was a study from back in 2007. Okay? And I'm just giving you numbers from a study, and it's not a study on Baptist preachers or Christian. It's a study on pastors in general. Okay? So a lot of these guys are probably not even our stripe. But in 2007, the study was this, that 1,500 pastors were leaving the ministry monthly for one reason or another. 1,500. In other statistics that they were taking, said 60 to 80% of those who enter into ministry, any ministry, whether pastoring or Christian school teacher, missionary, any of that, they will not still be in the ministry 10 years later. 10 years. And as I start thinking about those, you know what it boils down to? You ever heard the term burnout? Yeah. That's a real thing, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And in ministry, that's a real thing. And in serving Jesus Christ, that's a real thing. Right? And I'm just going to be open with you guys about this. That's why, as your pastor, I get away sometimes. I'm not getting away to go have some fancy big hoorah vacation, okay? My wife and I, together, most of you know this, since we started the church, last January was the first time the two of her and I, not counting marriage retreat, okay? But if you're at the marriage retreat, you know we're trying to help you guys and all that too. So, but that was the first time my wife and I had gotten away by ourselves. Why? Because we're so busy, but I also realize we need to. And okay, there's a couple different conference type things that I pull myself away to. The one in April, I did last year, but typically my wife doesn't go with me because it's almost a busy week. But some of that is I have to recharge myself. Right? I have a couple places that during COVID, the Meadow Grounds lake was drained. And I had a spot out there that every Thursday, that's where I went to. It had a stump where it's covered with water now, so I can't go sit in there. It's kind of hard. But there was a stump out there that I had a blanket. I'd lay out on the ground, and that's where I'd just sit. Why? Because I need to make sure that I have time with God. And if your pastor needs to, and Jesus is insinuating through his teaching, Jesus Christ, what did he do? He got up into a mountain to pray. If Jesus Christ needed to do that, how much more important is it for us to do that? You want to stay faithful to God? You want to say, you know what? I'm not going to give up. I'm going to keep on serving Jesus Christ. You need to make sure that you have time with Jesus Christ as often as possible. You need for sure every day. And it's not a time that you get up and say, okay, let me read my 2 chapters and then I'm going to go on my life. And I'll go through my God give me this and God give me that prayer list and go on with, no, you need to spend fellowship time with him. We have to do this. Let's go on. Number 3. Give you this one. If you're going to stay faithful to God, continue that love with Jesus Christ, you need to be very careful who you listen to. Very careful who you listen to. Paul mentioned this one. I don't remember exactly which book he was talking about, but the statement was made, who doth hinder you? And the idea was, he looked at one of his followers, Paul did, and he said, something's not right. Who hindered you? He didn't say what hindered you. He said who, because so often it is people that draw us away. In a sense, you can say that Eve's great mistake in the garden was what? Listening to someone else. That led her astray. This is the young people. If I can give you any advice, it would be listen to godly leaders. Your parents, God gave them to you for a reason. Are they perfect? My daughters are. I'm just kidding. My daughter would be the first one to say, no, my parents aren't perfect. I would have said that about my parents. They weren't perfect. And for a long time, I hated the advice they gave to me. Until I realized God got a hold of my heart, and I realized that they're exactly who God wanted me to be under. To listen to them. When you reject the advice of your parents and spiritual leaders, you have to embrace advice from someone. I think about Solomon. His son, Jeroboam. When Jeroboam went to the older men and asked for advice, and then he went to the younger generation and said, what do you think? And he followed the advice of the younger worldly generation. And it created a division in the whole kingdom. It was also a mistake of listening to worldly friends and advice of Jesus' generation, the Jews. When you look deeply at the entire life of Jesus' life and ministry, you begin to see these trends and patterns. And one of those is this. The whole question in Jesus' day was, which shepherd were the common sheep in Israel going to follow? The common person. Who were they going to follow? There was two choices when Jesus was here on earth. The Pharisees stepped in and said, you need to follow what we tell you to follow. This is what, and they used Bible to back it up, didn't they? Isn't that interesting? They used the Old Testament law, which was the Word of God, and say, you need to follow us. And Jesus Christ says, no. You need to follow me. And who you choose to listen to is the direction you're going to go. All right? I'll say this. I have friends in ministry today that are Baptist preachers today. And if you watch them, or you watch the people that they fellowship with, I can tell you something about them. Some of them will not be Baptist preachers in 10 years. Why? Because they'll become who their friends are. That's known, isn't it? You become who your friends are. So what I'm saying is, if you listen to wrong preachers on the internet, things like that, you read authors that are not according to the Bible, you better be careful, because that's where one of my instructors growing up used to say, you are what you read. Right? And I've had people in our church that have asked me straight up, what do you think about this guy? And I've told them, beware. All right? One of them being Mark Driscoll, if you know him or not. All right? Terrible. Shouldn't be a pastor. I don't know if he's called a pastor or not. All right? But he's known for violently abusing his workers in his church. But they'll go listen to him, and you know why they listen to him? Because he tickles their ears. He tells them exactly what they want to know. I had somebody else that I sat with, and I said, hey, I just want you to know that the person that you're listening to is a Calvinist. Oh, I don't listen to everything that they say. It doesn't matter. What's the Bible say? If they're off in one point, you shouldn't listen to them. You've got to be careful. You say, well, how do I know? Trust me, I understand. Okay? You look up on the internet, how do you know? Let me give you some guidelines to look. Before you listen to them, before you're so wrapped up in the content of maybe an individual, that's what often happens, is you hear one part of a sermon or one sermon that sounds really good, right? And you're like, ooh, I like that guy. But then you get sucked into listening to more and more, and before long, you don't even realize that you've been blinded to it. But what I would tell you is look into their life. If you're able to find their sermon on the internet, that tells me you at least know how to get on and look for some things. Type their name in. Look at their life. Look at the people the crowd that they're with. I have some people that I really love to listen to their preaching. I'm thinking of one guy in particular right now. I really like his style of preaching. But I began to notice something about him. The crowd that he was hanging with. I'll just say this, okay? Without getting all into it. The crowd that he was hanging with has become known as cover-up. Okay, there was somebody connected to them that was actually he is in prison right now for molesting a young person. And this was coming out in this group that this guy was preaching with. One of them hired him, and they began to do this cover-up process so that it wouldn't come out and he'd be okay. And when I didn't know all this at the beginning, and when I began to hear this and began to see that he just continued even through all of this, and then to the point of defending it some, sorry, that's not for me. Unsubscribe. I don't think I was subscribed to anything of his. But the church that hired that man that tried to cover it up, guess what? Unsubscribed. I don't need to I don't care. Their sermons are not that important to me to listen to. Because I see the crowd that they're with. Look at their doctrine. Real quick way to test if it's somebody you should listen to. Go through and find their biography and find their doctrine and see if they specifically say we follow the King James Bible. Because most likely if they don't, ding, 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 good idea not to listen to them. The term that I heard probably within the more recent years was this term. I'm mainly King James. You ever heard that, Brother Allen? That term grates me so bad. And actually, I heard that preacher that I just mentioned one time say that. And I thought, what does that mean? Means most of the time they're going to use the King James Version, but in their personal life, maybe in their personal study, something like that, they're not going to. Sorry, I'm okay. What they have, I don't need. Look at their direction of their ministry. Here's an easy one. This is an easy one. Look up their family. Now I know. People, preachers, things like that, they can have kids turn out good, and because of individual soul liberty, another kid doesn't turn out right. I'm not saying that's perfect, but if 100% of their family is going towards the worldly trends, and there's no direction towards the things of the world, or things of God, why do I want that influence on my life? I don't need that. The devil is going to cross your path with some version of a Pharisee. Okay, just understand that. He's going to cross your path with someone who's a Pharisee that looks really good, and all they're there for is to get you off track. Look beneath the surface before you allow that person to influence you. The next one, number 4, and I think this is the last one. To help you keep that love for Jesus Christ vibrant, growing. When what God does doesn't make sense, just trust Him. That's going to keep you a lot closer to God than you realize. When you look at the people to whom Jesus Christ ministered, who chose to leave Him, you're going to find something. It was not only because He stopped doing miracles or because they listened to wrong people, but also because sometimes He did and said things that they didn't understand. Let me give you some examples here. John chapter 6, verse 54 says this. Whoso eateth my flesh and drinketh my blood hath eternal life, and I will raise him up at the last day. Verse 60 says this. Many therefore of His disciples, when they had heard this, said, This is an hard saying, who can hear it? Jesus said some things, Jesus preached some things that were difficult. Verse 61 goes on and says this. When Jesus knew in Himself that His disciples murmured at it, He said unto them, Doth this offend you? Verse 66. From that time many of His disciples went back and walked no more with Him. All right, so what happened? Jesus Christ got up and preached something that it says there offended them. And because something that the preaching said that was offensive to them, they walked no more with Him. But the answer's right there. Verse 67. What is it that when God puts something hard on us, what is it that's going to keep us going? Faith. Verse 67, Then said Jesus unto the 12, Will ye also go away? Then Simon Peter answered Him, Lord, to whom shall we go? Thou hast the words of eternal life. And we believe and are sure that thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. What caused Peter and those disciples to stay with Jesus Christ? He says there, we believe and we're sure of it. You know what's going to keep you faithful to Jesus Christ? Faith in Jesus Christ. What's going to keep you with Him? Trust Him. He's going to do some things in your life that you say, I'm not so sure about that. There's going to be preaching sometimes. Boy, that's offensive to me. Yeah, preaching ought to be offensive to you and to me. You know why? Because we're in a natural body. We're in flesh. And it's not going to always be comfortable to us. But when my faith is in Jesus Christ, now if it's not the Word of God that's preached, if it's opinion, yeah, that could be offensive. But when it's Jesus Christ, if it's offensive, guess who needs to work on something? Me. Let me give you a real life example, not from my life, but a pastor friend told me this. He said he had a guy, he started a church in the Chicagoland area some years ago, and there was a man in his first service that as the church grew, he became influential as far as finances. He was supporting the church for over 40% of their income. I would think he was influential. But the pastor said as time went on, something happened in the man's life, and it was a tragic tragedy. His son was murdered on the streets of Chicago. We would all say that's a tragedy. That's something that if that was to happen, you'd certainly say, boy, God, what are you doing? That's hard. How can I handle this? But he said it was just like this. Went from being faithful to the church to quitting entirely. And the pastor said, I came to call it this term. May not know it as much today. Hubcap Christianity. What do you mean by that? You hit a bump in the road and the hubcap goes off spinning, off to the side. And I'm trying to tell you this. I promise you, I'm not trying to discourage you. I'm not trying to get you upset. But God is going to do something in your life that's going to deeply test your faith. Possibly He's going to do it several times in your life. Think about it. When she had her tumor on her back, 6 months to the day later is when I went down with my heart. What was God doing? Testing us. That's just not fair. Okay, many of you were here a year ago. I hesitated to bring this up. I wasn't going to bring this up. Why do so many people leave our church? Can I remind you of the statement that was made up here by one of those men? I've had a problem with Jim's preaching for over a year. It was nothing to do with anything else that was going on. I don't want to bring this up and open up more wounds, but it's almost a year ago. I feel like we've moved on. Okay? God's been so good to us. I was thinking that today, as I was thinking, I don't want to do that. You know we've not had one bill unpaid this whole last year?
Amen.
There's money in the bank. I mean, it's not like we're like, it's not like we're, buying brand new vehicles or anything like that. But God's taking care of everything. Why? Because God doesn't need, God can provide. And I was talking to a friend the other night and a pastor yesterday, and I made this statement. God builds His church sometimes by addition, sometimes by subtraction. And you know who needed to be built through that time? Me. I needed it. And you can talk to a couple of the men that were here that night. I was ready to pack it in. You can ask my wife. There was times that I said, I don't need this. But you know what kept me going? One was the people. That the next service our neighbor and daughter come and get saved. Huh. Imagine that. Well, not the next service, and 2 services because it was Sunday night. Huh. Imagine if I packed it in where they'd be going for eternity. That kind of brings it to a real perspective, doesn't it? That my neighbor would die and go to hell because I pack it in. And we could give that number of people over and over. Justin's gotten saved through that time. And Justin's sister Leah and Justin's brother Cole have gotten saved through that time. Guess what? It's worth it. Because now I get to go to heaven with some of my good friends. Right, Justin? My visiting partner, right? All right? Isaiah got saved since then. Messiah got saved since then. Bill, I think you did too, didn't you? I forgot about that. You know what I'm saying? Don't give up. It's interesting. I'm awfully glad that God didn't hit us with that battle as quick as he hit Jesus with it. Because Jesus was only 2 sermons into it. At least I got a little bit longer, right? And God's taught me some things, a lot of things through that time. I believe one of the reasons God wanted us to go through this series on Jesus Christ is so that I could focus on preaching more of just what's here. Not just every, a lot of preaching we do is topical. Well, we're just slowly inching our way through. That's okay. We'll be all right. There's not too much to preach about Jesus Christ. There's plenty. But what I'm trying to say is we're in the last days. The Bible teaches so clearly. I was listening to a pastor friend of mine preach today on this, on signs of the last times. Guess what? There's going to be divisions.
Yeah.
I want to be right with God. I want to stay on the right side. I want to grow stronger. There's a whole bunch of people who were initially excited about Jesus Christ. But there was only a few that followed him for a lifetime. How many disciples made it to the end of their life serving Jesus Christ? Of the 12, only 11, right? How many, here's a question, trivia question for you. How many disciples were killed for their faith?
Okay.
Well, she got it right on. 10. They tried to kill John the Baptist. The Apostle John. They boiled him in hot oil, but he didn't die, and they exiled him to Patmos. All right. And then obviously Judas killed himself. But you think about all those followers of Jesus Christ. You think about him when he preached on the mount, the Sermon on the Mount. You think about him when he did the miracle, the feeding of the 5,000, the miracle, the feeding of the 4,000, different miracles like that. You think about when the story I was working on today, when they brought the man sick of the palsy. They couldn't even get to Jesus because the press was there's so many people. They had to climb up on the roof to get in. But when you get to the end of Jesus' life, where are they all at? They're saying, crucify him, crucify him. How? How did they go from loving him so much to being on that side of it? Because I believe it's these things here tonight. One, they were there following him because of all the, yay, yippee. There's more to life than that, than miracles. There's walking with him consistently. Those people that followed him that went away, they were there. And they made time for him, but they didn't spend time with him. They weren't careful who they listened to. And they didn't trust him when what he did didn't seem to make sense. Let me tell you, Jesus Christ doesn't always work in ways that make sense to us. Aren't you glad of that when it turns out better? But let me remind you, Romans 8:28, all things work together for good to them that love God, to them that are the called according to his purpose. You may not see it working out as good. Okay, you think about our church. I'm just telling you, there was some time of testing in my life after that. God, we dropped all these people. God, our offerings dropped this much. God, so all things work together for good to them that love God, to them that are the called according to his purpose. Guess what I got to do? Just stick with Jesus Christ. Fellowship with him. Walk with him. It'll be okay. I have decided to follow Jesus. What's that last phrase we sing a couple times at the end of that? No turning back. Another song, we've come too far to turn back now. Stay with Jesus. Love him. Let that love grow.